Hello and welcome to the Paradigm Shifters stage at the World Education Summit. My name is Kathleen Johnston and I am your host for this session, Leadership for Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. I am delighted to welcome to the stage Professor Paul Miller. Paul is Professor of Educational Leadership and Social Justice and Director of the Institute for Educational and Social Equity, the UK's first fully independent EDI institute. He is the first and still the only Black professor of educational leadership appointed at a UK university. Now, while Paul is presenting, we have a chat facility, so please do ask questions and any comments, and I will share them with Paul at the end. We'll have some time for Q&A. And also remember to use social media with the hashtag WorldEdSummit. We want to hear from you. I'm very much looking forward to this session. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, colleagues, for joining me this afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you. So the brief is for me to talk about leadership for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that is pretty much the work of the Institute around equity, diversity, and inclusion in organizations, in systems and processes and policies, in the curriculum, whatever the organization is. So what I plan to do today, colleagues, is to present two case studies of leaders, school leaders leading change in equity, diversity, and inclusion. Some of you who may have read my work may have read these case studies, and if not, then I hope you might find them useful. If you have indeed, I hope you might have a different interpretation, having hear me now talk about these leaders themselves. So the first case study talks about school leaders leading curriculum inclusion. So this is about school leaders trying to make their curriculum more inclusive so that it meets the needs of learners. So here we have a group of 11 school leaders. All of these school leaders participated in a program over 12 months. All of these school leaders are school leaders in two London boroughs, in Haringey and also in Enfield. All of these school leaders are white school leaders. It's important for me to say that because a lot of the times when we think about anti-racism work, for example, we think that it's only people who are not white who are leading that work. And here we have school leaders who are not white leading this work as well. And so over one academic year, in the middle of the second lockdown in 2020, back in October time, these leaders came to us and said, well, can you help us? Our curriculum is quite white. It's not culturally inclusive, and we want to be able to improve this for the experiences of our learners. And this was an important opportunity and an important challenge. Here we have 11 school leaders, senior people saying, well, our curriculum is meeting the needs of the learners, but more importantly, we don't know what to do. And that's really, really important because my colleague, Christopher James at the University of Bath, Professor Christopher James, he has done some work on leadership and ego. And these leaders didn't allow their ego to get in the way. They understood what they needed to make their work better, their practice better, and they were humble enough to go there and seek that. So they came to us in the institute and said, well, can you help us? Because we don't know what to do. And so we designed a program with them and for them that included some of the following things: 4 half-day sessions online where we met as a group, and there were these 4 modules. We looked at what cultural competence is, why it's important for teaching, why it's important for leadership. We looked at issues around what's a diverse curriculum could look like, what's a decolonized curriculum could look like, and also if you've read some of my work, you know I coined the term inclusivizing the curriculum. So we looked at what an inclusive curriculum could look like and steps towards inclusivizing. And then we also looked at ways to identify and tackle bias in the curriculum. And we also went through the inclusive curriculum framework inventory. Now, many of you will know that when Kingston University developed the inclusive curriculum framework, it didn't pull together an inventory to assess the perceived degree of inclusivity in a curriculum. And that's what we did. We in the Institute developed that. This is what we were able to share with the participants, an audit tool to say this is what you could use, benchmark against the inclusive curriculum. And so we went through all of that, 4 half-day sessions, and then we had 2 one-to-one sessions with each school leader to look at their school data, their exclusion data, their academic outcomes data, even if that were on internal test scores, and so on. So it was really getting school leaders to look a little bit differently at their data in the context of the curriculum engagement. And then the final element was the institution focused case study. And this is where we gave the head teachers access to the inclusive curriculum framework inventory. They took this inventory into their school, sat down with one subject group. In most cases, it was history or English or science, and they worked with that small team, 3 or 4 people, to inclusivize their curriculum. And then a couple months later, we in the institute went back into those schools and look at what the school leaders had accomplished by working with their staff teams to make the curriculum more inclusive. Something else it is important to say is that following each of the sessions, the taught sessions, the cultural competence and the diversifying and so on, school leaders organize an inset in their organization to trickle down the learning to their staff. That meant their teachers and their teaching assistants and so on. So if we had the session on a Monday, by the Friday, the head teachers would go back and train up their teachers and staff. And this was really important because what the leaders were doing was to create an internal multiplier effect. And that was really, really important to galvanize attention of the work, but also to galvanize momentum internally around doing the work. Now, what were some of the project impacts and outcomes? Well, this is a quote from the paper. Going into the ICP, the Inclusive Curriculum Project, participants were not clear about what to expect. And why were they not clear? They were not clear because nothing like this had ever been done before. There wasn't any program to help head teachers or school leaders or teachers for that matter to inclusivize their curriculum. But they were clear what they wanted from it. They wanted the knowledge and the skills and the confidence to be able to design an inclusive curriculum, to demand an inclusive curriculum from staff because they now have the knowledge of what it should look like, and to supervise it because again they had the knowledge and the skills, and also to deliver that for their young people. So they were pretty clear about what they wanted from it, even if they weren't clear about how they would get there. School leaders, through the process, we saw them being deliberate in leading learning for staff, what I talked about earlier, or they would schedule their insets or staff development activities around what we completed in terms of the workshops. And all of that was about improving outcomes for young people. Our conclusions or our observations were that through the accounts of these principles and watching them at work, we saw them growing in confidence, personal confidence, professional confidence. School leaders now knew that there was such a thing called the inclusive curriculum framework. Many of them, indeed all of them, didn't know there was such a thing. They knew that their curriculum wasn't culturally diverse, hence they describe it as too wide. And they wanted to fix this for the learners, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't have a framework, they didn't have a language register, and so on. They didn't have the skills. They were able to demand more accountability from staff only because they knew what to look for. And not only did they know what to look for, they know how to support staff. We saw them supporting staff through targeted CPD sessions and more targeted CPD sessions. And that's really, really important. It's not just the generic CPD sessions, but targeted CPD. And they were working much more closely with parents and other stakeholders. And all of this was towards centralizing the voice of the child or the learner through notions of belonging and identity. And that's really, really crucial because ultimately that was what these leaders were working towards. We concluded in the paper that school leaders need targeted CPD. Teachers need targeted CPD as well. Leaders need targeted CPD. All of us need targeted CPD. This is not to say that the school leaders' masters in educational leadership or their doctorate in education isn't an important piece of qualification. Of course it is. It's really important. But when we are dealing with issues around curriculum inclusion or social justice or racial justice, those require different kinds of learning and content and so on. And this is what these leaders were set out to achieve, to understand and to acquire the skills to deepen and widen their work in curriculum inclusion. So school leaders need targeted CPD, but not only school leaders, teachers and um, all leaders. School leaders need well organized CPD. None of the leaders missed a single session. This was in the middle of COVID-19, lockdown 2, and it went on for a year. And none of these leaders, not a single one, 4 um, half a day sessions, and none of them missed one because it was so important for them not only to take time out for their own learning, but to acquire or to give themselves the space and the opportunity to acquire the skills that were needed. Third, school leaders' learning should support an entire school community. And I think this is really important that as a leader, whether you're leading a small team, whether you're leading a large team, in whatever context you're leading, if you learn something and it doesn't support your entire team members or your entire community, then something is wrong with you or what you've learned, or both. But your learning should advance the practice of your team or the practice of your institution, or both. And we saw that. We saw where school leaders went back in and they worked with the staff, with the teachers, with the teaching assistants to improve the curriculum, to inclusivize content and the artifacts and the pedagogy and so on, so that the whole community could benefit. And then the final observation we made is that school leaders can take charge of their learning. So this is where the work around ego comes in, that these leaders were not so pompous in their own position that they felt, well, we knew it all. No, they had a huge amount of humility in recognizing that despite my high position in the organization and despite my high qualification, there were things I didn't know because these things were just outside of my previous training span or my previous lifespan, and therefore I don't have the knowledge or the skills or the confidence to be able to tackle these issues. And so one of the other conclusion we made is that school leaders can and do take charge of their own learning, for they know what they lack or what they do not know, and they have demonstrated in this case that they have the agency to seek out the support. So this is really, really important as well. We won't have time to answer this question, but I still pose it for you to think about. As a leader, how well do you know the gaps in your own knowledge base as far as leading equity, diversity, and inclusion is concerned? What is the gap in your own knowledge base as a leader? What are you doing to narrow those gaps? I could ask you another question. What gaps exist amongst your team members, your staff, and what are you doing also to narrow those gaps? So it's an opportunity for you as an individual to audit your own skills, to audit your own experience, to audit your own knowledge, but also to do that same process of auditing with your staff and with the people you're relying upon to do the work, because that will help you to identify where there might be an oversupply of expertise and where there might be gaps in the organization's ability to deliver effective interventions in equity, diversity, and inclusion. The second case study I want to present is about leaders leading under racism and inclusion. Again, looking at the work of some school leaders. 5 school leaders, different contexts, different approaches, but all with the same goal: for leading equity and inclusion at school level. In the paper, there is a section that is called institutional activism, and this section describes the actions and the activities, or some of the actions and activities undertaken by leaders to inclusivize the curriculum or their organizations. The next section in the paper is about impact. And so when you read the paper for yourself, you can determine much more closely and clearly what these leaders achieved. So principle 5, mixed heritage, male, 30s, secondary school, grammar school, girls' school, London. We have created from scratch a whole school or trust EDI policy, and this school was part of a multi-academy trust, and sometimes the trust has trust level policies rather than school-based policies. So this is that reference there to whole school trust EDI policy to provide enhanced accountability and regulation. So that regulation is important because you want people to be singing from the same hymn sheet, more or less, have the same expectations, the same broad ways of behaving, and promoting consistency and building a culture. We've put in place and delivered staff training on the fundamentals of EDI, race-conscious language and unconscious bias. We have revamped the school's behavior policy and systems to ensure rules are applied fairly and do not discriminate against any group. We've commissioned an external organization to review key policies. We have amended our student uniform rules and punctuality procedures that were previously negatively impacting BME students. We've created a fully led student equity commission, and we have developed enhanced reporting tools for students to report any racist incident and safeguarding issues. We've also undertaken a whole school EDI survey. So a huge amount of work you could see happening in this school to promote and secure equity, diversity, and inclusion. Principle 4, British Indian, female, 40s, secondary, London. We've undertaken an externally commissioned EDI culture review, the report from which has given us an action plan. We've had the implementation of the action plan evaluated by an external organization to gauge our progress against the action items. We have launched a forum for parents and carers of students of Black and global majority heritage. And when I went into the school to study the forum, it's fascinating. I've never seen anything like that before, because it's not a forum for parents of students of Black and global majority heritage. It's a forum for parents and the carers. So you did find a lot of white people in this space, all trying to do what's best for their parents or those that they were caring, their children or those that they were caring for. This forum has been so successful that it has led to the launch of a forum for parents and carers of students with SEND, special education needs and disability. And this is a good example of an internal multiplier effect where something has worked really well. And so we need to make it, roll it out in other areas. We've commissioned training for all staff on anti-racism, on safeguarding, and have provided middle leaders with targeted training in equity and leadership. We have reviewed our enrichment offer, such as the clubs and societies, and we've introduced new ones. We have commissioned an external organization to review our history curriculum, and we have established a task force on Black exclusion and Black achievement, because in this school, Black achievement is low and Black exclusion is high. And so there's a task force operating over 2 years to study and to support the school's interventions in trying to raise attainment and push back against exclusion. Again, a whole range of activities in promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. Principle 3, white, female, 40s, secondary, Catholic girls, London. I've created an EDI action plan. There are 6 areas, for example, assessment, professional development, policies, and each area was led by a member of the SLT or senior leadership team. This was a KPI or key performance indicator for each SLT member. In other words, this head teacher put responsibility for in equity, diversity, and inclusion in the performance appraisals of the senior leadership team. We have started a task force with representation from parents and governors and students and staff, and it's still going on. And we meet every half term with an agenda. So it's not a talk shop where you go and tickle people's tummy, but it's an actual space where there is accountability and monitoring of the environment and the environmental ambitions and so on. We've used an anti-racism coach to support our thinking. That was really challenging. We were entering it was like a whole new learning experience, not just emotions, the heart as well. So the journey we were on was not just intellectual, but it was affective as well. So here, this head teacher is talking about this journey that even coming to a state of building her self-confidence and that of her team required some emotional investment. And we talk all the time about not being able to do this work without hearts and mind. And here she's saying it was uncomfortable at some points, but we were all in. And so the more emotional it got, the more we knew we had to do this work. Principle 2, white, female, 40s, secondary, Catholic girls, London. So another Catholic school. We established a working party comprising staff, parents, governors, students, external visitors to shape our inclusion and anti-racism work. We call it Imago Dei, which means in the image of God. And at this school, the Imago Dei work is split into 3 parts: Imago Dei Race, Imago Dei SEND, Special Education Needs and Disability, and Imago Dei Human Love and Sexuality. And these are the 3 areas of work that the school has built their EDI work around. It's important to recognize as well that in a Catholic school, We have a head teacher devoting one strand of her equity, diversity, and inclusion work to human love and sexuality and being bold and explicit about this. We've completed a lot of training around anti-racism, intersectionality, and adultification. Or adultification, you're treating children as if they're adults, and the penalties attached to them or applied to them are as if they're adults, and so on. And all of this have enabled us to review whether our school's mental health provision and upgraded reporting processes, and so on. We have launched our anti-racism policy. We have commissioned an external curriculum review. We have looked at our extracurricular provision. We have been much more purposeful in how we use data. We have introduced cultural days led by students, and we have also commissioned an external EDI culture review. Again, swathes of intervention here happening in the school. Principal 1, white, male, 30s, primary, Watford. Our inclusion and diversity and anti-racism work is shaped by the words of a well-known EDI specialist, wouldn't call myself that, who said, I see you, I hear you, I belong. So context of this is that Chartered College of Teaching asked me to do some work seminar in October 2020, and I made the point that when Black children see Black staff in school, even if they are not teachers, they might be the front office staff, back office staff, teaching assistant, canteen staff, you name it, doesn't matter. As long as you see somebody who looks like you say, I see you, I hear you, I belong. Which means because you are here, it's okay for me to be here. And because you're here, I am safe. And I made that point on that call, that seminar. And one head teacher who was there, the head teacher in this case, took my words and built their school campaign around those words. You see me, you hear me, I belong. So these words have guided all our work. We started out with a monthly event where staff are invited to come and be part of a discussion. And as time has gone on, it's evolved into more of a working party in a truly collaborative approach to school improvement. And one thing I must say about this school and their work is that this is a school that have more teaching assistants and non-teaching staff involved in the EDI work, or certainly in terms of the EDI working party. And this is really, really important because sometimes the front office staff or the back office staff or the staff who are not teachers or academic teaching staff get excluded from these opportunities. And so here was a school that recognize that EDI work is everybody's business, and we need our teaching assistants and front office staff and back office staff and all of those. And they said we hadn't quite anticipated it would have gone that way, but that was a key part of the change or part of the action. We have looked at our curriculum, the content, the way it's being delivered, the language of learning. We are investing a lot of time into redesigning it to make it more inclusive, to make it more representative of the community we serve. And that's evident in some of the text and the labels for the books. So I pitch up to the school and I see the books have these diversity stickers, and which is such a brilliant idea. And so kids, once they see those stickers on the books, they know that those books have diverse characters and so on. We have invested in training to build racial literacy, a literacy of inclusion to reduce ignorance or insecurity or lack of confidence. We have to equip our staff to be able to talk and feel bravely and talk with a safe language. We've also celebrated World Hijab Day. It was when I went to this school, for example, and look at their work that I realized there is such a thing as World Hijab Day. How many of us out there knows that? We held picnics and focus on theme days and celebrated through songs written by our children, and the result of which has been a sense of belonging. So we see so many school leaders taking this work seriously. So just to summarize what they did in these last 5 schools: anti-racism policies were created where none existed before. 2, EDI strategies where none had existed before. 3. EDI action plans introduced. 3. Revisions to behavior and safeguarding policies. 2. Data monitoring for detentions and exclusions of students. 2. Task force or commissions or some working party set up to advance the school's internal EDI work and to create an internal multiplier. 5. Training for staff. 5. For students. 2. And it's important that you look at those who have provided training for students, because you can't only be tackling this work from top down or bottom up. This work needs to be synergistic. And so you see people providing staff training, but students training as well to build their own confidence and their awareness, and governors and so on, and working differently with parents. In addition, 4 of them had externally commissioned culture reviews, where organizations like ours would go in and interview staff and students and look at the data and provide them a report with some recommendations. SLT-wide responsibility for EDI. 4 of them made sure that that was in the performance management. Working with other schools, that was crucial. 2 schools were doing that to create not only an internal multiplier effect, but also an external multiplier effect. School campaigns, excellent, 3 of them, which was key for the internal multiplier effect. So people know with EDI work, there's a lot of low trust and no trust. So the school campaigns really helped to galvanize that. And 4 of them were working with external specialists to provide review of policies or review of curriculum. And 1 of them did some work around leadership coaching. The next question I want you to ponder, and we don't have time, obviously, but this is for you to ponder, is given where your school is at now, or your institution, it might not be a school, your organization, what is the next practice in inclusion for staff or students around some of these issues: sexuality, gender identity, ethnicity, and so on. Next practice. And what this question does, it forces you to identify the current practice. So what's your current practice? How would you rate your current practice? But crucially, in rating your current practice, it gives you an opportunity to identify the next practice, to build out your action plan, and also to think about having separate action plans for staff and student, even if you combine action plans, because staff will have different needs that from students, and in most cases, staff will look differently from the students. Anyway, so we see the work of the school leaders through the lens of social justice leadership. Social justice leadership has 7 characteristics, and you can see the work of the school leaders that we've just talked about. All of these 5 plus 11, 16 school leaders, social justice leaders, actively try to right wrongs and marginalize groups. We saw that. That is what they were trying to do. They use their position to create safe spaces and opportunities to promote equity between individuals and groups. That is what they were trying to do. Their position wasn't a meal ticket. It wasn't a blocker. It wasn't a status symbol. It wasn't a sign on the door. They were actively involved in trying to right wrongs and to use their position to intensify equity within their organization. They understand the material, economic, cultural, social differences between groups. They understand that the same intervention for Pakistani girls might not work for Indian girls or Bengali girls or Turkish girls and so on. They understand the material, economic, and social differences. Similarly, they understand that the interventions work for students who are trans might not be appropriate for students who identify as queer, and so on, regardless of this catch-all term called LGBTQ and so on. So they understand the nuances, and they were working actively to intervene at the intersection of those nuances. They understand that they must change systems and processes and structures, such as the policies, such as the behavior policies, such as the safeguarding policies, such as the punctuality processes, such as the uniform rules, such as the HERE rules, and all of those kind of things. and so they were working all the time to create fairness in their schools actively, and also to promote and achieve equity for all. Final slide for us to think about, colleagues, is about the privilege of leadership and privilege. One of the things we have to think about is how privileged leaders are to be able to make change in the lives of so many people. So, just citing the work of Harry Broad says, we need to be clear that there is no such thing as giving up one's privilege to be outside of the system. Well, the truth is, where would you go? One is always in the system. You and me. There is a system, and you and I are always in that system. The only question is whether you and I are parts of the system in a way that challenges that system or strengthens that system. And we can see from the examples of those leaders, they were actively challenging the system. Privilege is not something I take, and which therefore I have the option of not taking. It is something that society gives me. So there is no shame in having privilege. We talk about white privilege, and some people get upset about that. That's nothing to be upset about. We talk about male privilege, and some people get upset about that. That's nothing to be upset about. There are lots of other privileges: able bodied privilege, um, English language privilege, British passport privilege, and all kinds of privileges. There's no shame in having those privileges. The shame is when we have those privileges and don't use them to advance social justice for other people. If you are able bodied, have you fought for the rights and reasonable interests of those who are not able bodied? If you're a male, have you fought for the rights of women and members of the LGBT community? If you're a Christian, have you fought for the rights of Muslims and Jews? If you speak English, have you fought for the rights of those who get mocked and jeered because their language is not English? So privilege is not something which I take and which I therefore have the option of not taking. It is something which society gives me. And unless I, which is me and you, change the institutions which give it to me, the institutions, will continue to give it, and I, me and you, will continue to have it, regardless of how noble our intentions are. And therefore, things will not change. So understand this, colleagues, whoever you are, wherever you are, there is no shame in having privilege. The shame comes from not using our privilege to advance the cause of social justice in organizations. We leave it there, colleagues. 7 minutes to reflect on any questions you might have. Watch your eyes. Watch your eyes.
Paul, thank you very much for a really interesting and thought-provoking session, covering the importance of being culturally inclusive and inclusivizing the curriculum and the role of school leaders and indeed every part of the school system in ensuring that happens. We've got a couple of comments in the chat that you may want to comment on. Derek Sawyer says, this really chimes with me. This work is about seeking our collective moral purpose. It also reminds me of the concept of mirrors and windows. Can our learners see themselves reflected in what they are learning, mirrors, and can they look out to the wider world to learn about the experience of others? Also, the fact that the practical case study examples, if colleagues are familiar with the work of Mark Finnis, he suggests a 1% principle: start with small implementations and watch the positive change which will happen. Wondered if you wanted to comment on either of those.
Now, thanks for those reflections, and I think those are really helpful. I think it's both the windows and the mirrors. Where where we have to create the opportunities for us to continuously reflect on ourselves, and that's where the privilege comes in, but also to see the world from somebody else's lens. And that can only make us better. I always say to school leaders when I'm doing this work with them, 5 years time, 10 years time, our learners will go on Facebook or some social media platform, and they will be calling us out because they will tell us that you didn't prepare me sufficiently for the world in which I was going to inhabit. you know and so we always have to be thinking about those windows and those mirrors, that we're not only training kids to look at themselves and to reflect back at themselves, but also they are going to go through those windows and shine that light out there and therefore transform the world. So I think that's a great analogy. And I also think that 1% principle is really crucial. Those school leaders are saying, well, I'm starting where I'm at. And none of these school leaders, none of them are claiming triumphalism. They are so humble. But I do think it's so important that we understand that, we have got one opportunity here to do great work. And I think those school leaders have recognized that and they've taken their opportunity.
Thank you very much, Paul. There has been so much shared in this session. I think it's really important to remind everyone that you can revisit Summit Central and revisit Paul's presentation. There's such a lot of worth and a wealth of information, both within the content from Paul himself and those case studies. So please do go back and take a look in the weeks and months to come. That just remains for me to say once more, thank you very much, Professor Paul Miller.
Thank you very much.